Well, I have the great privilege today of being joined by Lelané Bezuidenhout, who's the CEO of the Financial Planning Institute, as well as David Kopp, who is the head of policy and engagement at the Financial Planning Institute as well. It's a wonderful privilege to talk to you guys today. And yeah, I mean, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. We had a very brief conversation earlier before we recorded this, where I was telling you guys that I was actually pretty nervous about this. And the reason I was nervous is pretty simple. I mean, it's because this conversation really matters to me. And so when I was thinking a lot about it made me realize that I actually have to try and think as clearly as I can and try to marshal my facts as well I can to try and express why it matters so greatly to me. So it is a wonderful privilege to talk to you guys today. I'll give you guys maybe a moment or two just to explain maybe what the FPI is, because I still get people asking me or turn at me with wide eyes when I say FPI, thinking that I said FBI. So I think it's important that we maybe explain what the FPI is, what its role is, as well as what you guys do in your respective positions. I think we can start with you, Lelané.
Sure, no problem. Thank you so much, Phila, and thank you for the opportunity to chat to you today. And it is a topic that's close to our heart. But before we jump into that, I'm Lelané Bezuidenhout. I've been in the financial planning industry for quite a few decades now. I used to say years, but we're moving into decades now. So I'm not a teenager anymore, and I've got an absolute passion for what I do because one of my mottos in life is that you take stumbling blocks and you make it stepping stones to improve whatever we are doing. And I must say, I'm thrilled to have been in the sector that we are in because I've seen it changed from when I joined in about 1998. You know, those was in the days before capital gains tax was even in South Africa. So that's not how old I am, but that's hopefully how wise I am. So yes, we had capital gains coming in, we had phase coming in. Back in those days, we only had PPR, policy protection rule, and it was quite a different world back in those years. You know, those years it was literally the broker selling policies, and the sector back in those years, those decades ago, didn't have a good name because of the unscrupulous practices that existed during those years. But we've come a long way. And now, if I can fast forward from 1998 to 2022. That's quite some years that we've been involved. And I've known David since 1998. Yeah, we both started at Liberty Life, and at some stage I actually reported into him. So we've known each other for many years, and we've got a very good relationship, and we share the same passion. So since Liberty, I've joined the Phase Ombudsman, where I then continue to investigate, especially property syndication cases. And it's at that point in time when I realized that, you know what, we need to do more from a standard setting point of view. So it's no surprise that I'm at the Financial Planning Institute. And this is not a job for me, it's a passion. You know, every day I wake up and I ask, how are we going to do, what are we going to do today to improve the sector as a whole, but specifically financial planning within South Africa? Now, FPI itself is a SAQA recognized professional body. We've been one since 2012. And we've changed our name in about 2001 from ILPA, which was the Institute of Life and Pension Advisors, to the Financial Planning Institute. Because during those years, collective investment schemes came in, and we didn't have that also in the early 90s. So we had to change it. And I mean, to talk about collective investment schemes that was new in the early or the late 90s and the early 2000s, to then move into it today, we're talking cryptocurrency. So I think in the early 90s, we would have had no idea what cryptos are all about. Yeah, so we're a SAQA recognized professional body. We're also an international affiliate of the Financial Planning Standards Board. And we're the only affiliate of the FPSB in Africa. But then we're also a recognized controlling body of the South African Revenue Service. And I normally say the whole name and not just SARS, because in other countries, people may think it's the SARS virus, which it's not. It's the South African Revenue Services. So yeah, we're an RCB, we're an affiliate of FPSB, and we are a recognized SAQA professional body. So that's high level, me in a nutshell, and FPI. But I will hand over to my colleague and longtime friend, David.
Yeah, and just before you do that, you forgot to mention that you are also the chairperson of that Financial Planning Standards Board, and that's a lot of chairs to be sitting on, hey?
Yeah, it is. And I must tell you, when I talk about me, it's difficult because it's not about me, it's about what we do and who we do it for.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
indeed,
yeah.
thanks for reminding me. I am the chair of the Chief Executive Committee, which is the top 7 affiliates globally for the Financial Planning Standards Board. And we've got quite a few focuses at this point in time, but one of the biggest focuses from the Financial Planning Standards Board is to ensure that we get regulatory protection of the term financial planning globally. It just started in Ontario in Canada, and we are in South Africa, not too far away from that, hopefully, with Kofi
Yeah.
coming in.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, absolutely. And just before I hand over to David, I want to say a word about David because him and I have actually been in contact for a few years. And I just thought before I gave him the chance to tell us a bit about himself, I'd just say a bit about him. So yeah, as I said, I've been in contact with David for a few years now. And I mean, the term passion is thrown around quite loosely nowadays, such that it's been devoid of all of its meaning. But when I think about the Financial Planning Institute or about the industry at large, there are a few names that come to mind that really, for me, I think embody what the industry is. And I think David is one of those people. So David, thank you so much for the opportunity to engage with you. You and I have actually been planning this conversation for a very long time. I know we tried recording a podcast last year, but didn't quite materialize. So I'm actually really, really glad that we're able to talk about this today. And yeah, it's an absolute privilege, as I've said, to talk to you.
Thanks, Phila. You're making me blush to start off with.
Flashing.
So I like to say I've been in the financial services industry for 24 years now. So yeah, decades. But I've been in the financial planning profession for 18 years. And why the difference? Well, I count the difference from the date that I actually achieved my CFP certification. So for me, that's the hallmark of being in the profession, holding the professional business. So I started out my journey at the end of standard 7, which is grade 10, 9. I don't know the grades now. Where while on holiday, I decided that I wanted to become a chartered accountant because I liked accounting. The problem is I'd never done accountancy before. So in the 2 weeks before school went back, I had to switch schools and catch up on 2 years worth of accountancy. So my journey was very much, I was going to become a chartered accountant. And then, in 98, 2 things happened. Number one, I hit auditing, and I found that accountancy is not just about the numbers. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes with it. And I didn't like auditing, but I also mistakenly landed in the financial services sector with the job at Liberty Life. And that really got my passion going for, hey, what I was actually studying, I could see how it works in reality. And that got me shifting from moving towards becoming a chartered accountant to pursuing my certified financial planner professional designation. So yeah, that's really, really me in a nutshell. And I think, through everything that I've gone in the last 24 years and seen the change from the industry into a profession, that's really what got me excited about things. And then 9 years ago, I joined the Financial Planning Institute, then as the senior manager for policy. And that's when it really got me passionate about getting this professional status for financial planning recognized. So it's been a long journey. And like Lelané says, we're hopefully going to get that regulatory recognition for the profession, which is sadly lacking. Because, one of the biggest problems we have is if everybody is allowed to call themselves a financial planner, the consumer doesn't understand who actually is a financial planner, who subscribes to the code of ethics, who goes through the training and everything that it takes to become a financial planner. So for me, the main part of my job is getting that recognition for us as a profession and to then start building on it. So once we've got the regulatory recognition, it doesn't mean, okay, we can sit back and job done, because we still need to then work with the consumers and get consumers to understand the value of financial planning and working with a accredited financial planner.
Yeah. And I think it's wonderful that you guys actually mentioned that you've been in this industry for decades. And I'm tempted to call it 2 separate industries because the industry that we're in today and the industry that I presume you guys started in are 2 very different industries. And I would presume that the 2 of you who have sort of existed in both periods, if I may call them, know and can see the real difference of the 2 industries. And I think it's important that you guys touch on the importance of the recognition of the CFP designation because there are a lot of so-called financial planners and financial advisors going around today, most of whom are selling products. And I think it's important that we get distinction between what an actual financial planner is, a certified financial planner, and what salespeople are. Because I think when we're talking about consumer education, it's important that people know what the difference is so that they know, what exactly to expect from, whoever they're dealing with. I'm not saying that it's wrong to deal with a salesperson. If some people want to deal with a salesperson, it's important that they deal with one. But it's important that people know what the difference is and that they don't conflate what a certified financial planner is with what a salesperson is. Which brings me to the conversation that I wish to have with you guys today. So I mentioned briefly before we started recording that I sat in a forum discussion that was moderated by David not so long ago. It was in collaboration with the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. So Lyndall Clark actually formed a part of that discussion as well. I have an interesting conversation coming up with him as well. But yeah, I sat through that conversation, or I entered it begrudgingly because I was busy with my schoolwork. And Caroline De Silva sent me a message and she was like, you have to attend this. And Caroline has since become like a mentor to me over the past, I would say, 2 years. So she sent me a message and she ordered that I go and sit through that forum discussion, which I did begrudgingly, but I did. And when I sat there, I just could not take my eyes off the screen, because what I saw on that screen pointed to the center of a real conundrum. The numbers that we saw there, I think, really put into perspective what it is that we're actually dealing with and the size of the Goliath that we're going to have to take down. And as I mentioned, David chaired that discussion. Lelané, I'm not sure if you were able to attend that. I believe that you were attending as well. I'm not sure if I saw your name on there.
Well, I did it, making sure that David behaves, you know.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. I did attend
Yeah.
because it's also very close to my heart.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's wonderful. So the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because I have, as you guys can probably tell, a very young audience that tunes into the content that I put out. And so I thought I'd be remiss if I did not take that information that was shared there and come and share it with the younger people who I think are yearning for such information. And I think, you know, hearing such statistics will really put into perspective just the kind of problem that we have on our hands. So David, you moderated that discussion. I'm not sure if you were able to see the document beforehand, or were you also as shocked as I was seeing it for the first time when you moderated that discussion? What was it like moderating it, and what was it like actually unpacking the contents of that report that was drawn out by the FPI?
So I think when you start talking about the passion for it, that's the numbers that actually drive the passion for what we do. Because I've got a firm belief that if people have a better level of financial education and can make a better educated choices in terms of what they're doing, we as a nation, as a South African nation, are naturally going to grow forward. So I did have sight of the documents beforehand, so it wasn't sight unseen. And it is a survey that's actually been conducted since 2010. And it just shows as well how the environment actually impacts on what happens in a consumer matter. So things like the lockdown, the COVID environment, how badly that affected consumers. But again, a lot of the things that we see, if somebody has got a financial plan that they've put into place and are working with. So we're not just talking about, I've entered into a transaction and bought some policies or something, but I've actually got a plan. It's a plan that I'm working with, that you're able to weather storms a lot better, and you're able to confidently make those financial decisions that are good for you. And that's really what drives this whole passion for financial planning is the right thing to do. Every consumer should have a financial plan that they're working, and have a financial planner who's there to actually guide them and keep them on track, because scary things happen, right? And we're all humans, and this is where the whole behavioral finance comes into it. If you're seeing your investments going down, if you're in this position where your budget is stretched and tight, you're going to make decisions that are irrational. Okay, and we know this from behavioral studies, and that's really where a financial planner comes in and says, hang on a minute, let's take a look at the bigger picture. Let's understand the plan where we're at, and how is this decision that you're making now going to impact on that plan. So it's always good to sit back and re-look at your decision in terms of your plan that you've got, instead of based on the noise that is going on. Because as I say, this too shall pass.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Lelané, what was your sense of that report? Were you as bewildered as I was, or did you expect to see those numbers? I would presume that you would have expected to see something of that nature, because you obviously work in the industry. But I can't imagine how anyone could have foresaw just how dreadful some of those numbers were.
Yeah, the numbers are indeed dreadful, and I think the numbers was not, but it doesn't mean, the numbers are not a surprise. It's still not shocking. It is shocking, and what it highlights for especially Financial Planning Institute is that we all, as a collective, if we look at the principles of partnership, professional bodies like the FPI, we are taking hands with National Treasury in developing curriculums that's relevant from a financial literacy point of view. We are taking hands with the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. Just the 15th of August, you would have seen that they published that they're kicking off the national speech competition again. And we normally play quite a big role in that we judge quite a few of these young individuals coming up from high, on financial planning principles, but also starting with the very basics of budgeting. So let me just quickly then talk about how do we get out of this conundrum? Well, it starts with thyself. You have to critically look at the man or the woman in the mirror and say, what am I going to do to help and contribute? Start with the basics of your own budget. Never spend more than what you earn. I'm going to repeat that. Never spend more than what you earn. It's okay not to eat pizza every night. It's okay to rather focus on eating healthy. It's okay to rather save. And there's a difference between saving and investing. So from your very first paycheck, especially for your young audience that you have, from your first paycheck, please start saving. Please start building up an emergency fund so that when we are hit by a global pandemic, I still cannot believe we've been in a global pandemic. I remember March when we had our first family meeting and my mom was visiting and she was then obviously stuck with us for longer because we went into lockdown, FBI shut its doors, all worked remotely. It still feels like, when I speak to somebody, did you also live through that? Because it feels like a nightmare. But you need to be ready at all point in time that when something like that hits, because a lot of people were retrenched or their income were reduced, and a lot of people were impacted negatively. I mean, if we look at lockdown level 5, do you remember that? When only the essential services were allowed to be on the road, and a lot of the businesses could not trade. They could not, especially the smaller businesses, they couldn't do any business. Then the whole debacle that came out with regards to business contingency and the claims that was repudiated, businesses in South Africa really battled to survive. And attached to those businesses are employees. So please, I'm going to repeat, start with ourselves, start with a very basic budget. Don't spend more than what you earn. Make sure that you put money aside for savings and especially an emergency fund so that you can survive during times when we go into global lockdowns. Hopefully, we will not see that for the next few decades. Hopefully, we won't see that again, but you need to be prepared for any eventuality.
Yeah.
Yes, even though I did expect Phila, the stats, it's still very shocking, especially the unemployment rate amongst.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, it's a fundamental belief of mine that people aren't just stupid. I believe that if you show people the facts, people tend to respond to the facts. Now, the issue is that people have not been shown the facts. And that is, I think, what is exacerbating and causing a lot of these financial ills to permeate our society. But there are a few things that I wish to touch on, just basically trying to put my mind, or trying to wrap my mind rather, around what the both of you have just said. So the question that I almost have is, who is to blame? If we are to lay the blame at anyone's feet, whose feet are we to lay the blame on? Because I mean, I touched on this forum discussion that I attended not so long ago, and there were dreadful numbers that were shown there. One of them was the number of South Africans that can actually identify what a pyramid scheme or Ponzi scheme. It was like 39%, or 4 in 10 South Africans can identify what a pyramid scheme is. And there was a very interesting joke that David told in that discussion. He said he presumes and hopes rather that the only reason people don't know what a Ponzi scheme is that they've never been a victim of one, which I thought was a pretty interesting way of spinning it, putting a positive spin on what is a very precarious situation. So, I mean, there's some light at the end of the tunnel, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, the question that I have is, if we are to lay the blame at anyone's feet, whose feet are we to lay the blame at?
I'll take a first stab at that. I wouldn't say it's placing the blame somewhere, but it's rather focusing on how do we work better to prevent this. Now, Phila, I did mention that I worked at the FACE Ombudsman for quite a few years. So these pyramid schemes, I investigated a lot of those complaints, and we need to understand where did it come from. So I am going to touch on quite a sensitive subject today. I mean, if we look at the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, the report that came out, if we look then at who is involved in organizations, you really need to understand beneficial ownership and who's the real owner behind FSPs, behind collective investment schemes, behind investments like property syndications. Why do you have beneficial ownerships? So let's start with how do we better regulate the individuals that really accountable for the financial institutions. And we also need to hone closer on, and into their own personal code of ethics and conduct. And I recall in investigating these complaints, they would always target the vulnerable, people who really show a lack of understanding. Widows, I think, was a part of the population that was hit because they are left without a loved one. They have children who have maybe moved on to different countries or not living close to the widow, and that yearning to trust someone. And then you have somebody coming in and saying, yes, you can trust me. And the moment somebody has to say to me, you can trust me, guess what? I don't trust you. Because you have to display your behavior that I can actually trust you. So I'm not going to answer the question on who do we blame, but if we look at rather what do we blame? So what can we then blame? Well, we look then at from a regulatory point of view. Again, you did mention we are in a vastly different world than what we were in the 90s. I mean, if you look at South Africa as a country, where we've moved to since 1993, 1994, that's when the regulations quite drastically changed. And then we had to start implementing, some of these regulations coming in phase, and it's a journey. And I think we need to appreciate it's a journey. And then we have not done all we can. And it's important that we have every single person that's involved in the financial services sector, which is quite large. It's from banking to investment, to the markets, to financial planning, to advice. I mean, when the FSB, Financial Standards Board, changed their name to the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, that's in terms of Twin Peaks. So I do want to say that I believe that that's the right move from National Treasury side, especially when the subprime crisis came in from the Americas, and we saw, and that was South Africa being proactive to bring in a Twin Peaks concept with a Prudential Authority and the Conduct Authority. And we have to, and I want to ask any single professional online and any financial advisor, if you have not moved in your mindset from a tick box approach to a conduct approach, because it's about critically on a daily basis questioning your own conduct. You always need to ask, am I doing the right thing? Is there an inherent conflict of interest? In other words, I do not have the best interest of the client at heart. Then maybe you should not be doing what you are doing, because the client's best interest must be at the center of every single thing that you do. Transparency and consistency. And always be that conflict of interest. So I wouldn't say it's who do we blame. It is rather what do we blame and what can we do as a collective to fix the standard and the overall mindset of the people that's in the financial services sector.
All right, absolutely. And just a question for David. David, I know you wanted to chip in there. I'll let you finish your thoughts on there, but there's a particular question that I want to ask you. So there's a very interesting point about South Africa having been proactive in its adoption of the Twin Peaks regulatory model. I actually had an interesting conversation with the commissioner of the FSCA, Mr. Untitled, and he was telling me exactly that, in South Africa, we did not really experience the subprime derivative crisis. Like, obviously, we had a few companies like Old Mutual that were invested in some of those, junk securities that were sold, but we did not really experience a financial crisis of the size and scale that would justify a move toward a Twin Peaks regulatory model. And so I think you're right in saying that it was a proactive move from the National Treasury to have adopted this. But you also seem to have pointed at regulation or the dialact thereof as having been at least one of the issues that's contributing to this financial illiteracy that we're seeing permeate our society. I'm not sure that that's the case, hey? Well, perhaps it is, but I'm not sure it's as big a problem as perhaps you seem to suggest that it was in the speaking term that you just had now, for the following reason. We've had regulations for a very long time. Now, obviously, they've changed recently, but they've been there for quite a while. And we've had a lot of consumer education programs that, at least in speech, sought to educate the public. But if, as you mentioned, that there were changes in 1994 already, or in 2022, but it doesn't seem to me that there's much that has changed. So the reason I asked the question about blame is, it seems to me that maybe there's something that we're doing wrong. Perhaps it's time that we stop, maybe stand back a little bit and maybe ask ourselves, what is it that we have done to maybe contribute to the problem? Because we aren't seeing, an improvement. It could be maybe a lag effect. I don't know. David, what do you think?
So I think, again, it's difficult to say who to blame.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put the blame on human nature. And I think human nature, and this is again where behavioral finance is such an interesting field to look at and things. And it's not something that is new. I think it's in the 17th century. There's a French philosopher called Diderot, and there's this whole thing about the Diderot effect. And he wrote a poem, and it was an ode to my red velvet dressing gown. And essentially what happened is, one of his friends gave him this gift of this red velvet dressing gown, and he put on this dressing gown and he sat down in his chair and he started looking around his office. And what he realized is he had this fancy red dressing gown that no longer matched his office. So he started looking at the chair he was sitting in, which was shabby and old and things. So he went out and he bought a new chair. And then sitting in his new chair, he looked at his desk, which was shabby and old and not matching that. So he went and bought a new desk. So the long and short of that story is that based on one thing, a red velvet dressing, he actually landed up in debtor's jail because he went into this total, I've got to match my whole life to this red dressing gown. And, he was pining for his old serviceable shabby dressing gown that kept him warm and did the thing. And if we expound that from the 1700s now, what do we have now? We've got something like social media. Okay, and we have people posting all kinds of things on social media. I believe people even go to the Golden Mile in Santon where all fancy brands are, and they take photographs of the Louis Vuitton bands to put on their Instas and create this illusion that this is what success looks like. And as soon as we have that, we're now just compounding the effect, because what does everyone do? They look at it and they go, well, success is me, having a 50,000 Rand bag that I can put around my arm. That's not what success is. So we need to deal with human nature. And I believe the way to deal with that is through financial education and allowing people to have, exactly as you said, Phila, do I have the information? Do I have the stuff necessary and the truth that is necessary? But yes, we've also got a financial services industry that in all kind of trust parameters come down very low in a trust viewpoint. So we need to change the consumer's perception of the financial services industry. And we can only do that by not asking people to trust us, but to show that we are trustworthy. So it's a very different concept of saying, trust me, or demonstrating that I'm trustworthy. And this is again where there are really good financial advisors, there are really good financial planners out there who do the right thing, who look after their clients, but they are tarred with the same brush of people who call themselves financial advisors or not. Now, on the regulation side, and this is a very interesting thing about regulation, I've always held the view that regulation is rarely put in place and is there for the people who don't require regulation. Okay, and let me explain it. So I'm naturally a good guy. I naturally will do the right thing and follow the law. So whether the regulation is in place or not doesn't really matter, because I'm already doing what the regulation is asking me to do. But if I'm a bad person, I'm going to look at the regulation and I'm going to go, how do I comply with the regulation but still do the wrong thing? And I think when we talk about a compliance-driven, rules-based regulatory environment, which we've had over the last 20 years, people have managed to sort of put stuff in place that go around the rules, but still make them look good. I think where we're going with principle-based regulation, it's going to be very difficult to hide doing the wrong thing. So this is why I'm excited about how the rules and the regulatory universe is changing from a financial services sector. But then the last point is, a lot of these scams and frauds and schemes are perpetrated by people who are outside of the sector, who are not in the regulatory net. Quite often we've had a Ponzi scheme reported to us, and it was very difficult to find the right regulator to actually deal with it, because the regulatory rules were so defined. Nobody could actually deal with it. And I think what's exciting for me in the regulations, we've got what's colloquially referred to as a duck clause. So if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's going to be regulated by a duck.
Charles Phila.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's really excited about the future that we can do. But the last point is that we should not, as consumers, rely on the regulations and the facts. We should rely on saying that it is part of my obligation, and this is where the FBI financial education philosophy came from. It was first, educate yourself. Okay, so go find information, whether you attend a workshop, whether you look at a credible website or source of information like the FBI Let's Plan website, like a CSIS Smart About Money, Personal Finance, in the Star, and that they've been writing, Bruce Cameron and his team in the past, they've written a lot of credible information. Maya on Money, there's a lot of credible sources out there. So follow the credible sources, but understand that it does get to a point where financial matters, and I'm not talking about products, but financial lives are very complicated. When you start throwing in, oh, well, I want to do these investments, and I'm going to use tax-free investments as an example, came out, and everyone was like, oh, this is great, I can save on a lot of tax. But a lot of people then start using them incorrectly because they are in a position where tax-free savings account is not actually delivering the tax effects that they think they're getting. So it does become very complex. So it does come to a point where you say, I'm at a point where I've got enough education to at least hold my own, but this is now where I need to find a guide. And this is where a financial planner comes in to help guide you further.
May I ask you a question? I know you're interviewing us, but may I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
And I'm going to ask the same question to both myself and to David. So who was the first person in your life, and at what age were you when you were taught something about financial management? How old were you?
I can't remember how old I was, and it wasn't taught to me overtly. as a lesson, but I would say, well, when I was probably like grade 6 or 7, when I could really start
Okay.
engaging with the subject matter. But again, it wasn't taught to me overtly as like
Primary
this
school.
is a financial matter, but it was through actions, because of course by their actions we shall know them. But yeah, it
Exactly.
was taught to me through actions, but never overtly as a lesson, either in primary school or high school. I only learned really about it in university when I studied financial planning.
You see, the reason why I'm asking, and I'll ask David now. David, when was the first time you?
Mine was probably when I was going to buy my first car.
Okay.
And the point was my parents didn't have money to go and buy me a car. So I was working. I mean, I started working when I was 11 years old. That's when I got my first job delivering newspapers. But yeah, my dad said to me that if you save up, so I wanted to buy myself a Beetle. And if you save up enough, he will then match half the contribution. And that started, that was really my first. And again, it wasn't overt and things, but it was that lesson in saving. So I had a goal to save towards and put towards it. And that's about investment returns. If I managed to save up half, the other half would come. So the investment returns would be there.
What an aggressive investor there. Phila, let me tell you why I'm asking. We're all very familiar with the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And I do believe that financial literacy is starting way too late. So, my call out to every single person listening to this episode today must please be reminded that yes, it's most probably millennials that's online. Millennials have what we call alphas. That's not an Alfa Romeo car. That's your child. That's your children. That's the next generation. So how are we going to raise the next generation? So financial management principles starts at home. So I do want to ask, at what age do you as a parent, or maybe the grandfather, the grandmother, the uncle, the aunt, whatever your role in your family setup is, we need to understand that as the adult, there's a big onus on ourselves to make sure that we raise the young ones. So whether you're a teacher, a Sunday school teacher, a teacher at school, wherever you have the opportunity to install good principles, financial management principles in the youth, I think therein lies the answer as well, because you need to understand. I mean, when I was young, I also worked, and there's a lot of the things that I had to buy myself, because this is how my parents taught me that if you want toothpaste, you buy it yourself, and I had to work for that, and I had to buy it. And if I didn't have toothpaste, well, I was through my brothers. So, and I did. So we just need to bear in mind that, it's not just about, I'm looking at National Treasury, what you're doing. I'm looking at the Conduct Authority. What are we doing in our own households? And there's a lot of literature out there that is specifically aimed at primary school children. And please make sure that when you do sit down with the youth, that we always mentor and teach. And if we see their behavior, like David has really hit the nail on the head with this whole social media debacle of what I think success is and what it is that I should be paying or buying. Success is being in a position to actually buy your first car, not having to go into debt. It's about having the right principles of, now that's something to brag about. So yeah, I just wanted to, that's why I asked, we need to understand that it's not, we cannot lay the blame at a very particular person or a time frame, or it starts with us. It starts with me. What am I doing to start in my household? And then you circle, and always says charity starts at home, but financial education also starts at home.
Absolutely. I could not have said that better myself. And I actually think that you yourself hit the nail on the head as well, because one of the issues that I've been concerned about is, for the fact that such things are not taught to people at home, or in schools rather as well, because it wasn't taught to me either in primary school or high school, means that the responsibility of educating young people about finances rests upon the shoulders of their parents and broader members of society who themselves didn't get any of this financial education. And so it becomes this rabbit hole that is not about to end unless something drastic is done about it. So I really do think that you hit the nail on the head when you said that. But I also wanted to circle back to what David said, because he mentioned there were two main takeaways that I had from that speaking segment. One of which was the point about credibility and trust. I think Adam Smith in the Theory of Moral Sentiments puts it well when he says we should strive not only to be loved, but to be lovely. And lovely in 18th century English doesn't mean, it's not an aesthetic point. It means to be morally attractive. So we want to engage with the world such that people find or see the need to trust us and to find us morally attractive, which I think hits the nail on the head as well. When you're talking about financial professionals, we shouldn't be going out there asking people to trust us. That should be displayed in our actions. And I think you put that very well. I think you summed it up quite well. The second point that you made was about social media, which is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, social media can be used for a lot of good. Look, we're having this conversation and we're going to share this, and a lot of people are going to engage with this and perhaps even start engaging and thinking about things that they had not thought about, or that they would not have thought about had we not, aired this conversation. So it's good in that sense, but it's also bad in the sense that a lot of very influential people who have very perverse and skewed ideas of what money and success is and ought to be also get the chance to permeate their content out there. And so that filters into the minds of young people, and young people have this derided view of what success is, as Lelané was saying. So I do think that social media is perhaps where the source of our problem as young people is. And some of us have deliberately sought to stay away from social media for, among other things, this exact reason. But what do you say to a young person who wants to try and put their lives in order, but is on social media and is seeing a lot of these conflicting sources of information? On the one hand, they're going to see the Davids talking about the importance of having a financial plan and starting very early. But on the other hand, they're going to see other content from people who have very different views of what money and success is. How do you deal with that as a young person? Because I think that really is the fork in the road for many young people in the country.
Yeah, so it's easy to say, right? But this is something that you learn with age and comes with maturity. And yeah, again, quite early on in my career, I was the windgat. I was trying to do everything that everyone else does. But at some point, you've got to realize that the only person you're competing with is actually yourself. So it's not what anyone else has, it's what I have. It's what makes me happy. It's what makes me comfortable. And yeah, I came to that realization a bit later on in my life. But if that's one nugget of wisdom I can share, it is, your idea of success should not be defined by others. It should be defined by you. And then another very important principle that I don't think is spoken enough about, and Lonnie mentioned it, but ultimately it is not what you make in terms of money, it is what you keep. So if that's one nugget that people can realize, and I'm going to disagree with my colleagues slightly because I watched a very interesting talk and they said start saving from your second paycheck. And the reason being is take your first paycheck, celebrate the fact that you've now got a job, that you've worked hard for it, and have a lot of fun in your first paycheck and just go wild and get it out your system. But from your second paycheck, start saving. So that for me was quite an interesting one. But it really is about, start looking at it from a viewpoint of saying that my success needs to be measured by something that is internal to me, that I've actually sat down and thought about and says, where do I want to be? What is important to me? And once you've defined that, then it becomes very easy to ignore the flash stuff and the fake stuff that comes out there. Yeah. And then the last point I'd want to make is check the credibility of the sources. So like I say, there is a lot of information out there. The FSCA has a consumer education website. The FPI has a consumer education website. So there's a lot of credible sources. The CISA Foundation has a website. So there's a lot of credible sources out there, and it's about discerning the credible sources versus the flash stuff. So really take a bit more of a deep dive inside things, because a lot of times the surface is not what is actually lying beneath.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And maybe just as a final question, sorry, Lelané, I'll give it to you just after asking this question. So I had a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine who's working as an analyst. And so his job, as a policy analyst, rather. So his job is to try and affect the macroeconomic outlook. And so him and I were talking about the difference, because both of us are ultimately interested in the same things. We're ultimately interested in improving the lives of people. And he's convinced that the best way to do so is to try and affect the macroeconomic outlook, to try and improve, for example, the level of interest rate in the economy so that people can access credit cheaply. And we were talking about the difference in our approaches to helping individuals. So he had a very umbrella approach, if I may put it in that way, of saying that to him, helping people is about trying to tinker with the levers at the top so that it filters down and ultimately improves the lives of people. But I'm not sure that that's probably the best way to do so. I mean, I can certainly see how interest rates can assist or can hamper the life of an individual. But I think that what it ultimately boils down to is the action of the individual themselves. And I think that there are many things that are beyond our control. The level of interest rate is beyond my control. I cannot do anything about it. The best that I can do is to, when the level of interest rate is announced, be prepared and play my best card when the time comes. So that's why I think financial planning is so crucial, because when you're dealing with individuals, that's where you can actually hone in on a lot of this that matters to people. You spoke about success being defined as what matters internally to an individual. And I think financial planning is one of the best ways to do so. So, I mean, the point about education really concerns me because I've got a BCom in financial planning. So these are things that shouldn't surprise me, these statistics from the FSCA's report. But it very quickly came to my mind that I'm very poorly educated by my own standards, right? And I'm constantly aware of it. And perhaps education or being properly educated is, as Peter Hitchens would say, to be in a state of informed discontent, to know, or at least to have a pretty good idea of just how much you don't know and how much it matters. And I think that's what that report sought to do for me. So maybe as a final comment, you guys can maybe just leave the viewers with a few more nuggets. I know you've dropped quite a few, but before that, I can just give Lelané the chance to finish off her thought that I rudely interrupted. My apologies. And then, yeah, we can wrap up.
No. There's two things I quickly want to say. So one, in response to you, it's important that we understand the principles of the monetary policy in South Africa. So we do understand once, inflation goes up, the monetary policy kicks in, and that's what happened now. Inflation went above the bracket between 4 and 6%. The moment that it hit higher than 7%, obviously monetary policy kicks in, and it has an impact on the repo rate and the interest rates that you've referred to. And I think the best that I can say here is we know that the moment that inflation goes up, interest will go up. So do not be in a position where you're sitting with more bad debt. There is good debt like paying down your bond for your house. That's good debt. But don't be in a situation where you've got a lot of bad debt, like you've got an Echo's account, a Woolies account, a Game account, every single account that you can have. You've got 5 cell phones, 9 laptops, Telkom, Cell C, and you've got too many retail accounts. Only buy what you need, and do not be in a position that, because you need to understand, if I can leave this with your audience, the moment inflation goes up, and that's not within our control. I mean, at this point in time, we have all sorts of factors that has created that, from the war to the Ukraine to a lot of other factors that we're dealing with in South Africa. It pushes up inflation, which means the cost of everything goes up, but so does the interest, because that's the monetary policy. So do not go into bad debt. Nothing wrong with good debt, still manage that, but be careful, to go into too much bad debt. Then another point that I wanted to just respond to David is I want to call on all the finfluencers today. If you're listening to this episode, I want to really ask you to there's a lot of people that follows you, and I have unfortunately seen with a few finfluencers here and there, they don't research their topic that well. And what you are saying, you need to take accountability as a finfluencer for what you are saying, because that's exactly what you're doing. It's financial influence that you have in your young audience. Make sure that what you're about to share with your audience is correct. Check your authorities, which means the law, the regulations, before you actually just go on air and just bubble out what you think. Always check your facts before you share it with a vulnerable audience. And then to the vulnerable audience, I do want to say I'm blessed with a millennial and a Gen Z, which is a generation Zoomer. He's 20 years old. And then I have a millennial who is 26 years old. And both their behavior when it comes to working with money is quite different. But I taught them the principle from a very young age, never be gullible, because gullible is when you believe every single thing that you hear. Always critically question whatever somebody tells you. And again, I think my closing thought is if somebody says to you, you can trust me, maybe do your research on the topic and perhaps your research on the person as well. We are in the World Wide Web where there's a lot of information available for you to do your own research before you believe what somebody says that's maybe posing with a very expensive handbag. Thank you. Over to David.
Yeah, so I think my final thought would be information is power. So educate yourself, do your research, don't accept anything on face value, and use your in terms of making those decisions. And I cannot emphasize the importance of a budget. You may think that you're in a position where you can't afford to do something or you can't reach a goal. And this is, again, something when I started working in the industry, it took me about a year to sit down and actually do my budget. And what I realized is that, I was just spending my money. And what was I spending on it? I was spending it on things like, and when you start adding it up, okay, and in those days, it was 20 Rand for a pie of Coke and a packet of chips. It's now, 50 Rand. And when you start saying, well, if I'm spending 50 Rand on that kind of stuff a day, that works up to 250 Rand a week or 1,000 Rand a month. Okay. And if I just change a small habit, okay, I could eventually save myself 750 Rand a month, which could be used for my future. So what did I do in terms of that small habit? I bought myself lunch on a Friday, and the rest of the time I made a sandwich. So it's small things, it's small steps. We don't have to do the big things to change. Start with educating yourself and then take those little steps to get to the place where you want to be and ignore where everyone else is going. Success is a personal thing. Thank you.
And I do not think that there's a better note on which to end today's conversation. David and Lelané, it's been an absolutely amazing conversation, thoroughly enjoyable and thoroughly insightful. And I'm sure that the listeners will themselves find it as such. So just a note to the listeners before I close, we are still a non-profitable organization and can only continue to exist with your support. So if you enjoyed today's content and wish to support us, please head on over to our website at NM Online. The website will guide you from there. There's a support option on our website. You can just click on it and you can support us from there. Just a reminder that we do not run any ads on our shows. So these shows are brought to you entirely through your own support. So if you enjoy this conversation and wish to hear more, please do consider supporting us, and let's continue having these conversations and educating ourselves and just putting information out there for people. Once again, David and Lelané, it's been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation, and I cannot thank you guys enough.
Thank you
For the
Appreciate
difference
it.
you are making. Thank you
Thanks,
so
you too.
much, and well done in everything that you're doing. It's with people like you in the society that we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you
It's
so
been a
much.
privilege.